In this episode of the pod, we are all about fleet. Fleet of the Future is one of the 4 themes for this year's Emergency Services Show. And when you think about emergency service fleets, you might not think about boats. But for the RNLI, they are, of course, fundamental to their service. And with 1,000 vehicles as well, it's a large and varied fleet spread across the UK. That means having the right boat in the right place at the right time. And with 238 places, they have wildly varying needs. It's an organisation highly dependent on volunteers, and the pride they have in their location. This year marks 25 years of RNLI lifeguards patrolling over 200 beaches around the UK. I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode of For Every Response, we have 2 guests from the RNLI. Tom Baker is Asset Management Lead, and Ian Hogarth is Vehicle Fleet Compliance Manager. Tom's been with the RNLI for nearly 2 decades, and Ian joined 4 years ago. Training and competence run through this conversation, and remarkably, they are using pages. I thought this technology had gone from the front line, but for the volunteers of the RNLI, it is the key starting point of their deployment, nearly 9,000 of them in 1 year. We'll talk about the volunteers, about training, technology, the electrification of the fleet, and find out why boats have names. Ian tells me we are living through a bit of a revolution when it comes to the fleet of the future. So we kick off this conversation by finding out about the shape and size of the RNLI's fleet.
What we've got is 238 lifeboat stations around the coast. And within each of those lifeboat stations, you have at least 1 lifeboat. So that could be an all-weather lifeboat, such as a Tamar, a Shannon, or a Severn. That could be an inshore lifeboat, such as a B-class or a D-class. Could even be a hovercraft. On top of those 238 lifeboat stations, we have more than 200 lifeguarded beaches around the coast as well, which also have vehicles attending them. So there are rescue watercraft, jet skis. There are also Arancias, which are small inflatable surf boats that are used globally in surf lifesaving. On top of that, we have everything we may need to get those assets from where they live into the water. Some of them are stored afloat. Plenty of them are stored in boathouses and other locations. Ian?
Yeah, so in terms of our vehicle fleet, we've got over 1,000 vehicles in the RNLI, ranging from simple tractors that are very similar to what you might see on a farm, all the way to our complex launch and recovery kit that helps place our largest lifeboats in the sea, as well as a fleet of road-going vehicles that support lifeguards and our lifeboat crews and volunteers. We operate such a diverse fleet, we outright own and lease them in combination, depending on its purpose. We've got lots of different types that we're operating, all the way down to, for example, crew transport vehicles that help take our crews from lifeboat stations to where the boats are located.
So that surprises me, that complexity for the RNLI, and no doubt others would say the same, in that you think it just boats, lifeboat stations, boats, water, that's it. But you've described something quite complex there in terms of the assets that you own. In terms of looking at the boats specifically to start with, do you buy them from other people or do you create them yourselves? You have like a place in Poole, I believe, where the HQ is. Where do they come from, all these boats? You rattled off a few types of boats there as a non-boat person. I'm afraid it didn't mean a lot to me. But in terms of the range of boats, where are they all coming from? What's the market like for boats that you're using?
It's a really interesting question. Yes, we've got a big range of boats, and it does create quite a diverse fleet. And in having that range of boats, it allows us to put the right boat in the right place for the right rescue conditions at that location. In terms of the market and where they come from, traditionally, the RNLI has either commissioned boats and external design to design us a boat, often build us a boat. So some of our recent classes have been made by people like Green Marine, who are a composite boat builder. So they made the hulls of some of our larger lifeboats that were then shipped to various boat building facilities and boatyards around the country to be fitted out. In the more recent past, we have taken on internal design of some of those boats. So the Shannon class lifeboat, which is our newest all-weather lifeboat, was designed in-house. It is built in the factory sitting opposite where I am. You talk about headquarters in Poole. We like to call it, tend to refer to it as the support centre rather than the headquarters. We are there to support our volunteers and our crew out on the coast in the vital life-saving work that they do. So we don't issue edicts. We are a central resource to enable the smooth running of the RNLI. In terms of our smaller boats, they're currently built on the Isle of Wight. We are currently looking at procuring a new class of boat, a coastal lifeboat. The intention for that is that we are buying in a proven design of lifeboat, and we're in the testing and trials phase at the moment to see what we think will best suit our needs in terms of those coastal waters out to 15 nautical miles, and how we procure that afterwards, whether we build and buy license and build under license, or whether we buy in from a manufacturer, is as yet undecided, as the project is still in its infancy.
How interesting. So you're building boats on the Isle of Wight. It's the Isle of Wight building only boats for the RNLI, or is it just simply a place where they make lots of boats for other people?
The facility is an RNLI-owned facility and has been for quite a long time.
Okay, interesting. So just before we move on to the vehicle fleet, the naming of the boats, I'm intrigued about the naming of the boats. So they're named after rivers. Well, why is that?
Sorry, the naming of the boats, so it's the boat classes that are named after rivers rather than the individual boats themselves. So, and it's a relative, individual boats do get a name. So whilst the classes of the big boats are named after rivers, the individual boats were a charity entirely funded by the kind donations of our supporters. And in terms of that, our supporters will kindly give us money to buy a new boat. And with that, they get the ability to name that boat, potentially after a loved one. We've actually really got a really interesting scheme that started in the last few years called Launch a Memory, where for those of us not blessed with sufficient money to support the build of a frankly high value asset, you can still have your loved ones' names put on certain boats as part of the number. So we have, I think it's 10,000 names on the numbers. Personally, my gran and my grandfather's name on one of our boats, on Eric's Legend, which is a relief Shannon boat. My grandfather was always a great supporter of the RNLI. He passed 20 years ago, and for a birthday present relatively recently for my nan, before she sadly passed in September, we had her and my grandfather's name put next to each other as part of Eric's Legend. So there's the ability to connect with the boats, even if you can't support the full cost of building a boat, which for the Shannon class is £2.7 million.
Wow. Okay. Oh, that's lovely. How nice that you could do that and to commemorate and to see your grandparents in that way. In terms of the vehicles then, Ian, do you have the same thing? Are you naming them?
We have that amazing programme that Tom has outlined in terms of naming our lifeboats. Donors do generously sometimes fund our launch and recovery vehicles, and sometimes they're named after individuals that are close to their hearts.
Excellent. So let's talk about your vehicles, Ian. So you said you had 1,000 vehicles in the RNLI fleet nationally. Can I just check the geography here? Are we applying this to the whole of the UK? So England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland? So
the RNLI operates not only in the UK, but also in the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands, and indeed in the Republic of Ireland. So we're actually spread across 6 different jurisdictions, and our fleet is across all of those locations.
Okay, so your 1,000 vehicles are across that geography. You talked about from tractors to other things. So when you're on a beach and you want to get a boat into the water, presumably you need a tractor to get it there. Could you just explain that whole thing about the lifeboat station, the vehicle, the boat and the water, how you sort of manage that? And who's doing that at the lifeboat stations? Maybe just for those of us who know nothing about how this works, it'd be nice to go back to basics.
So obviously most lifeboats, they can be located in a variety of places. Some of them are moored permanently in the water. Some of them are in boathouses that have an elevated ramp into the water. Some of them are in boathouses that are accessed from beaches. Whenever we're considering what launch and recovery vehicles to place into a location, we first assess things like what terrain is there, what's the distance to the shoreline, to the water, are there any local hazards, and what does it need to do, and also what type of lifeboat are we going to launch. Moving large all-weather lifeboat like the Shannon class from a boathouse to the sea is quite complex in comparison to one of our inshore lifeboats. So we assess every location based upon its unique features. When it comes to actually specifying the vehicles, our vehicles have to be really robust and capable of withstanding marine environments. And so we carefully select the right vehicles really for the right work, often converting them ourselves if needed to ensure that they're durable, that they're easy to maintain, and that they will be ready and reliable for when we need them for volunteers to launch.
So it's the same as Tom said earlier, which is the right boat in the right place. So you need the right vehicle for the right boat in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely key and crucial. And 238 locations, there are so many differences in the setups required.
And you talk about the different terrain that you've just carefully described there. How do you make sure that people have the skills to be able to deal with the fleet that you have? Because I understand you have volunteers, but do you have fully paid members of staff who are managing this fleet for you?
Predominantly, teams on the coast are volunteers, and they are trained in how to maintain and how to keep our equipment in the best possible condition. Often vehicles will be with them for a considerable number of years, maybe only departing for refits and then coming back to them. So they become really familiar with these vehicles. They understand the maintenance schedules that are required, and they're supported by our teams around the coasts as well.
Okay. And is it the same with the boats, Tom, that there's that familiarity that this is my boat, my lifeboat station, these are the people who look after it? Is that the same sort of setup when it comes to the boats?
The volunteers and crew have a huge amount of pride in their boats. Often they have been integral to the fundraising to pay for the boat as well. Their level of familiarity. So there's training provided to anybody to both operate and maintain our boats. We have a training college here in Poole where people can get away from their day-to-day life. Bearing in mind most of these people are volunteering their own time, so they can get away from the work, they can get away from noise, family, for want of a better term, and come here and focus purely on getting better at maintaining, better at using, safer usage of their vessels. There's then a wide scope of training carried out around the coast, both from paid staff, but also peer-to-peer training at lifeboat stations. So most lifeboat stations will have a training night a week where they will focus on individual exercises and things like that. And that enables our crew to carry out the vital rescue that they do as safely as possible, and ensures that they maintain a level of competence, both in terms of usage, but in terms of maintenance of their fleet as well. Sorry, lifeboats. That's about boats.
So you're using kind of terms that we hear a lot in the emergency services world, which is around competence, which is around training and exercising. So presumably there's different demands on these different lifeboat stations, depending where they are, the time of year and so forth. So in terms of keeping that competence up, do you have a set regime for lifeboat stations that they must do a certain number of hours in terms of deployments? So they've got to be ready, as you say, but recognizing that the different time of year, people go out in the water when it's nice, don't they? So in the middle of winter, perhaps they don't get so many call outs. So just wondering in terms of what's the training regime that a lifeboat station would have for the staff?
Right. We're veering slightly away from my level of experience here, but we have a competency-based training system which has been updated fairly recently. And in terms of that measures core competence against various important skills to carry out their roles safely. So a coxswain, person in charge of the boat, will have a different set of skills to a crew member, and that ensures and carrying out sufficient exercises to address those key competence areas. And our system ensures and gives them an overview of what they need to train, what they've done recently, and allows them to best plan their in-station training and in-station exercises around the needs of the crews and what the station requires to maintain serviceability of the boat.
And that applies presumably the same for the vehicles then, Ian, in terms of making sure that the competence of all the volunteers is there and it should perhaps renewed. I don't know how that would work with different vehicle types that you've got.
Absolutely. Competency framework details what level of training is required and how often, what level of training within station is required, and what level of activity is needed to retain that competency. We have these really great teams, roving teams of coastal lifeboat trainers and lifeguard assessor trainers, and the coastal lifeboat trainers will visit different RNLI locations around the UK and Ireland, and they bring training to life with those teams. They check their competency on the vehicles. They pass on best practice. So it's a really established, very thorough and a very capable system that gives a level of reassurance to our volunteers that when they call upon those skills, they're going to be ready when they need to launch.
And do you keep a central record of all of that as an organisation?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've got, because of the level of volunteers that we have, yes, we have detailed systems that back all of this up so that we can keep the sort of global pictures of levels of competency and any training requirements.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
I'm interested also to talk about command and control. So we've talked about the boats, we've talked about the vehicles, so we understand the fleet, we understand the training and the people, but let's understand the process by which they're deployed. So if someone calls 999 and asks for Coast Guard or asks for police or fire or ambulance, but actually what they need is rescuing from the water, how does that come through to you? And how does that then help you deploy the boats and the vehicles in the right place at the right time, as you've just described? So maybe, Tom, do you want to start that off and then Ian come in?
So in the RNLI, it starts with the pager that people are probably familiar with from programs such as Saving Lives at Sea. When the pager goes, we go. And we are tasked by the Coast Guards of the UK and Ireland to respond to any incidents. And their role, the Coast Guard role, is ongoing leadership, coordination, and indeed management of any incident. Our volunteer teams, they respond to the pager, they launch, and they work under the direction of other Coast Guard teams who they have a really close relationship with. And indeed, our volunteer teams, our volunteer crews, they regularly work and train closely with other agencies to ensure that we're familiar with each other's systems, processes, and indeed that means that we can work even more effectively to save lives at sea. We launch as an organisation over 9,000 times a year, and we assist more than 17,000 people across the UK and Ireland annually in so many different ways. But for example, Tower in central London, it's our busiest lifeboat station with crews on standby 24/7. And indeed, in that location, we work very closely with other rescue services.
Yes, as soon as you said that, I thought about the London Fire Brigade boat. Are you deploying together? How does that work when you've got another agency so closely with you?
Coast Guard will retain overall command of any situation, and they are very good at tasking, what we call tasking, so assigning the right life-saving services to the right incidents. We've a really good relationship on the Thames with other agencies, including the Metropolitan Police, who have got their own water-based service, and we work in coordination with the direction from the Coast Guard and these other emergency services to back each other up and to coordinate activity to create the fastest response we can.
You mentioned pagers earlier. I was surprised to hear you talk about pagers because it seems like quite an old technology these days. So on the boat itself, what other technology would you see in terms of the fleet, both in terms of the boats, but the vehicles themselves, not necessarily about communications, but other sort of tech. What could you expect to see? Or is it very boat specific, different classes you talked about? I'm trying to make sure that I've actually been listening here. So maybe, Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about the tech we could expect to find on a boat?
Sure. I mean, a boat is an interesting and complex system, and I'm sure the people that listen to this podcast, pretty much all of their resources are equally interesting and complex. Boating has some very specific, just being at sea has some very specific things in its nature. So on a boat, things you won't find on a vehicle, high-tech suspension seats. I know you get them on vehicles, you get things that take up a lot more shock mitigation on boats to keep our crews safe. You've got systems like radar and navigation. Navigating a boat, there's a few more complexities than navigating a vehicle, even off-road. Going from point A to point B isn't as simple as driving in a straight line the way you might think it is. There's potential obstacles in the way and things like that. So fairly complex nav systems. Communications are quite interesting as well. Our boats predominantly use VHF to communicate. We have, at present, MF systems on our boats for when we're out of range of VHF. Those are currently sort of in the process of being replaced with SATCOMs across the fleet, because MF is a very old technology, frankly, and it isn't as reliable as we'd like it to be. We've got a new lifeboat management system, which is in the process of being trialled on one of our boats and will be rolled out fairly rapidly, which is going to greatly increase the level of connectivity of our boats. It should, in time, enable things like digital tasking and the sending of digital search patterns directly to our boats from the Coast Guard. It also enables our boats to communicate back to us so that we can move towards a system of sort of condition-based maintenance and better preventative maintenance that's based on the actual condition of the boat at any given time, as opposed to hours counters the way you find on a lot of things, or even time-based maintenance now.
I feel like I've entered your happy place, Tom. You got quite excited when I asked you about technology. You leant forward and started talking about it with great passion, which is lovely. What's MF?
Medium frequency. It's radio again, but it's VHF is very high frequency. MF is medium frequency. So it's a longer range radio, but it suffers from all the sort of things that you might expect from a longer range old communication tool, in that you get dropout, you get signal black spots. It's better than VHF radios, but it's not perfect everywhere, which is why we're rolling out SATCOMs, which have significantly better call quality and connectivity, no matter the weather or the atmospheric conditions.
And will that is that interoperable with the Coast Guard then? Are they using a similar system?
Yes, they are. So honestly, a SATCOM, a sat phone, it's like ringing a mobile phone. It's just you're not reliant on a mobile phone mast.
And the technology on the vehicles, Ian, is that sort of something that's developing and changing in the same way that Tom describes with the boats?
The lifeboat systems, as Tom has sort of outlined, are quite complex and specific for lifeboats. In terms of vehicles, we're really interested in sort of innovation around vehicles, and we are in the process we're really excited about a new telematics system that we're looking to install, which will ensure that we can use our road fleet in the best possible way, perhaps even using AI for good to drive further efficiencies. In terms of other innovations as well, we're trialing electric vehicles across the organisation, and that's really going to help us understand the complexities around electric vehicle transition that other emergency services are contemplating, and develop a wider EV transition plan for the entire organisation. It's really starting to look as well at the next generation of vehicles and what the future fleet of the RNLI looks like. So really interesting times with the development of technology and with electric vehicles. It really feels in the fleet space like we're living through a bit of a revolution at the moment in terms of all the changes.
Added in future of the fleet, which is very appropriate given that that's why I was talking to you today. So thank you for that. But I'm going to pick through a couple of things you said there, but let's just go back to the comms on the vehicles. So we link with what Tom was saying. So in terms of the communication between the vehicles and the fleet on the water, do they talk to each other?
Many of our vehicles that are working alongside the lifeboats travel incredibly short distances from lifeboat station just to the shoreline and back. So there's coordination between the lifeboat, between the vehicle, and between any station activities. But there's significant layers of personnel between all three that just ensure that it's coordinated to the best extent.
So you mentioned telematics, interest in telematics. So telematics is something that have been on emergency appliances for many years and provide a lot of useful data, particularly data that is then being used for innovation and the AI, which you also talked about just then. So tell us a little bit about the move to telematics. Why make that decision? What are you going to do with the data? What difference will it do to improve your service?
So we have had telematics fitted to a majority of our fleet for several years now. But what we're seeing in the marketplace is that traditional, maybe almost legacy telematic systems are developing in leaps and bounds with new suppliers and new ways of working. So as we roll out a new telematics system, we are taking the opportunity to increase coverage, including all-terrain vehicles that support our lifeguard function, which incidentally our lifeguards celebrating 25 years of operation this year. And by increasing the profile of the fleet that's fitted with telematics and also developing new solutions, what we're really looking to do is to drive further efficiencies in terms of understanding vehicle usage, our future vehicle requirements. As you can imagine, with the lifeguard world, RNLI activity is quite seasonal. And so it's understanding what does the future fleet profile look like? How can we best manage that whilst at the same time using our donors' money wisely? So it's going to give us a improved holistic view of our entire road fleet, entire vehicle fleet indeed, and just ensure that we can really manage it to the most optimum extent we can.
And the telematics data, you're capturing that in a sort of central software system that you can all access regardless of which lifeboat station you are and where you're attached.
So we, with the rollout of our new telematics system, we've got very firm data protection guidelines, but we're also putting in place mechanisms to ensure that we can robustly use that data within the organisation, use it for decision making, and use it for a level of intelligent fleet planning that maybe is going to bring us to another level in terms of vehicle fleet management. So we're really interested in it. The capabilities of these systems are improving all of the time. And we're also looking at what our other colleagues in emergency services are doing in terms of telematics provision and understanding from them some of the challenges and opportunities, because none of this is new to the RNLI, and other people at times have addressed challenges too.
And thinking about the boats, Tom, do they have telematics? Does it work in the same way?
Because of where our boats stored, kept, where they live, there's not particularly great connectivity at the moment. So the boats don't transmit telematics data at the moment. It's stored centrally on their control systems. It can be accessed when we need to access various data on speed, condition, location. With the advent of our new lifeboat management systems, we should be able to transmit that sort of data, which will give us a much better picture of operational profile. In the past, when we've wanted to do work to look at our operational profiles, so what does an average shout for a lifeboat look like? We've had to either go back historically and look at returns of service, which are manually inputted, effectively sheets. So we've got a computer system, but it's manually inputted by the volunteers after they've returned from a shout, possibly at 3 a.m, outlining what they did, where they went and how they did it. Or we've had to put sensors specifically for whatever task we're looking at onto a boat, allow it to operate for a period of time, and then download that information and analyze it. So we're hoping with the implementation of things like our new lifeboat management system, we'll be able to better access data to drive decisions the way Ian's talking about, and better monitor the condition of equipment, but also what it's doing. Slamming is a particular issue with boats going out in heavy seas. You see a lot of big impacts. Being able to monitor that and proactively monitor that for both condition of the boat and the health of the crew is really useful, and it's something that we're hoping to introduce fairly soon.
That's fascinating. So it's actually giving you so much data, but in lots of different ways to affect you. So Ian, you talked about efficiency and thinking about future requirements, and Tom, you touch on welfare and impacts on your volunteers, but also about the longevity of the fleet. So, and that, which in itself presumably goes back to the incident type behaviours and perhaps the training and development. So it all just shows the ecosystem, doesn't it, how it all fits together. but it's all at its heart is about the data. So with you having all of this data and collecting more and more of it through this telematics process, as you put it on more and more vehicles, do you anticipate, and you mentioned this briefly, Ian, AI, so using technology to help you do even more with it, do more clever things? Is there anything specific you can share with us in terms of how you're using artificial intelligence to help with your operations?
At the moment, we're exploring what its potential is and what the capabilities are, but we are seeing that telematics providers are creating systems and software and indeed upgrades that have AI built into the functionality. So whereas historically we would have analysed usage patterns ourselves using processes or systems that we had developed through things like dashboards and Microsoft Power BI, we're seeing now that modern telematics can do a lot of the analysis for us and indeed give us insights into our fleet that we haven't yet seen. Vehicles are really expensive by their nature to procure and operate. We need to ensure that we're spending our donors' money wisely, get the absolute best value out of our fleet. With a fleet of our size, telematics is really the most logical way of getting that global view of it all. And AI will help deliver the insights in terms of usage and also in terms of things like transition to electric vehicles, where we can use their sophisticated software, for example, to understand what users and what vehicle types can migrate over to electric vehicles based upon their work patterns, their geography, and their location. So it's something that's real interest to us. Technology is advancing at a phenomenal pace, and it's something that we're looking forward to embracing.
I'm so glad you talked about electric vehicles and that transition process. So a couple of things from me. One is around, in terms of your electric fleet, what numbers out of the 1,000 are currently electric in any way, shape or form?
So we've just started this really exciting proof of concept program whereby we've sought to look at our fleet and all the different areas in which we're operating, and we've created a series of proof of concept trials. The idea of those trials, lasting 6 months, is to understand the good, the bad and the ugly of operating electric vehicles. And so we're trialling them in the Highlands of Scotland, out here in the wilds of Ireland, and in England, we're trialling them with frontline teams. We're trialling them with managers that support those teams. And what we're seeking to do is to build a real understanding of the pros and cons of operating these vehicles and how they're going to fit into our wider strategy. Ultimately, with a fleet the size of the RNLI, in terms of our road-going fleet, we're going to be looking at an ease of electrification strategy, whereby you start with the users and the vehicle types that can migrate easiest first, and then you work through the cases all the way until you get to the most complex users, the most complex operating environments. If you can imagine, we operate in some very rural parts of the UK and Ireland, and so we need to make sure that we've got the right solutions in place. But electric vehicles is really exciting. The trials are going to be really important, and ultimately they are going to determine what vehicles we procure for the next 5 years as we look at where the market's going. We look at what our colleagues in the emergency services have done ahead of us, and we make decisions that are right for the organisation, that are cost effective, but are also fit for the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things in there. One is that that fleet that you have probably has a longer lifespan. So, for instance, a fire engine can be 10, 15 years before they change them out. And maybe it's the same with some of your vehicles, that they're not being used a vast amount in terms of, maybe they last 10, 15 years, in which case then at some point in the future they will have to switch because there simply won't be any ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles left. So your planning and mapping out is looking at that risk, isn't it? It's looking to see what the extent of that is over those many, many years to come. Have you thought about charging as well in terms of that planning process? Because those remote places are not going to have charging infrastructure. So have you thought about that, and have you mapped it against what the emergency services are doing, see if you could share anything?
If you imagine our estate of 238 lifeboat stations means that we've got a huge number of buildings and there's a lot of potential. In terms of our electric vehicle trials so far, we're looking at vehicle types, and that's been really interesting. But from users, the greatest concern is not over the vehicle types or their capabilities. The greatest concern is over charging and how to adapt their vehicle use and their mileage patterns to finding charging infrastructure. So the way in which we are looking at charging is that we're keeping a really open mind. Will charging mean fitting chargers at all lifeboat stations? Or actually in the emergency services and indeed in the further charity sector? Are there ways that we can look at it in an innovative way, maybe by sharing infrastructure, by sharing charge capacity where it's available? We're keeping a really open mind about charging infrastructure for the future, but ultimately, as we transition our fleet over in the coming years, it's going to be at the forefront of our plans.
And is that the same for boats, Tom? So are we looking at green boats running on electrics? I have no idea. What's the state of play in the boat world?
We're committed to carrying out all of our activities as sustainably as we possibly can, but that's without compromising our ability to save lives. Boats are a little bit more complicated than vehicles. It takes significantly more energy to push a boat through the water than it does to even push something like a fire engine or a larger vehicle or a lorry. As a result, we've got an ongoing project within the engineering space to keep track of what sustainable propulsion options look like. At present, certainly for our larger boats and pretty much across the boat fleet right now, the most sustainable option is drop-in fuels, and it's more environmentally drop-in fuels. Obviously, those aren't a perfect solution, but when you've got 1,000 horsepower, 2,000 horsepower diesel engines propelling your boat forward, having sufficient battery or anything else on board the boat just doesn't work at present. So right now we're keeping a watching brief on the market and a watching brief on technology, but none of that is in a position right now to sustainably support boats that may spend 8 hours at sea in one go, and when they return to shore with our crews needs to be ready to go again almost as soon as possible. There isn't potentially time to charge, and the ability to have an additional standby boat would obviously potentially double your costs. So it's not there yet. The RNLI wants to do those things as sustainably as possible, but what we don't want to do and what we won't do is compromise our ability to save lives at sea.
This conversation has really helped me to understand more about fleet of the future, and in turn help develop the theme at the Emergency Services Show. There's a real pragmatism from Tom and Ian and a deep sense of safety at the heart of their operations and their thinking. They're looking to the wider world beyond the RNLI to learn and bring that into their orbit, improving their operations and making every penny of donors' money count. Tom tells us about the role of technology on the boats and its potential to enhance interoperability with other services. And so often my conversations for this podcast turn to data. It's what you do with the data that matters, and Ian tells us that it will inform the ease of transition to move this fleet along its decarbonisation journey. Telematics data is crucial here, but only for the road vehicles. It sounds like the boats are further behind in this area. And as usual, AI pops up. The fleet of the future is already benefiting from AI-driven innovation, and as Ian says, it has the potential to create benefits we haven't yet seen. I'm excited about this theme for the show, and maybe we'll get Tom and Ian there too to share more about their work. My thanks to both of them for taking time to talk fleet with me. That's it from me for now. Episodes of this series drop every Tuesday. All our podcast episodes are sponsored by MSA Safety, and we're so grateful to them for their support. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to, for every response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.